On March 10, 2020, the Robert Morris men's basketball team stood atop the Northeast Conference for the first time since 2015, defeating St. Francis 77-67 in the championship game in front of a packed UPMC Event Center crowd in its first year of existence. The Colonials were led by Dante Tracy in this game, who picked up tournament MVP honors after his 18-point performance against the Red Flash. 3 other Colonials finished in double digits in points on the night, riding the energy of a sold-out UPMC Event Center right into the NCAA tournament. After 4 years of middle-of-the-pack play, falling short in conference tournaments and not making it to the dance, Robert Morris is on the precipice of ending that in 2020. The team was led by 9th-year head coach Andy Toole, who had quickly established himself as the top-tier coach in the NEC and one of the up-and-coming coaches in all of college basketball. The team had 3 senior leaders, guys who put in a ton of effort for the program in their careers, who finally got the chance to dance in the NCAA tournament. Josh Williams held the NCAA record for single-game three-pointers for about 2 days after dropping 15 against Mount Aloysius early on in the season. He had his best season from beyond the arc, shooting 43% from outside. Yanis Mendy, the France native, was a role player in the starting lineup, having his best season as a Colonial, averaging just above 8 points and nearly 5 rebounds as the starting power forward. Savion McEwen was the spark plug off the bench, doubling his point output from the year prior and pumping up the team and crowd throughout the tournament. The rest of the team was just as important as the seniors, and the junior class of Williams and Bain was a solid one. While his brother was the more prolific scorer, John Williams was a steady shooter and scoring presence on the offense and had started every game in his career up to that point. Charles Baine took a step down in production from his sophomore season, but still was a big body down low and was a rebounding machine. Dante Tracy sat behind Matty McConnell for his freshman season before evolving into a reliable shooter and playmaker as the starting point guard his sophomore year. Performances in the last 2 games of the tournament, 12 against Long Island and 18 against St. Francis, pointed out as his breakout performances that could carry over to the next season after he won tournament MVP. Then came the bench. The most important piece on the bench was AJ Brahma, a JUCO transfer who was ferocious on offense coming in from Mendy. He averaged 13.4 points coming mostly off the bench and leading the NCAA in field goal percentage at around 57%, and he also picked up 8.2 rebounds per game in his first season in Moon. Jalen Hawkins was another JUCO product who came into his own at Robert Morris, averaging 7 points coming off the bench in every outing as a guard. Cameron Wilbon was out with injury after a solid freshman season, missing the entire campaign. The rest of the bench was made up of freshmen in Elisa Gennady and Terrell Brown, who did not play much but made an impact when they did in their first seasons. Also, the last guy I want to point out is on the right. Cam Ferris was a recruit, a 3-star out of Vermont who graduated early and spent the remainder of the season with the team, not allowed to play. While he didn't play, he still is in the picture and we will get to. This was an extremely talented team on the verge of realizing a lifelong dream, but first, the world stopped. COVID wiped out the NCAA tournament and with it brought an offseason of change and a complete remodel of the roster within a calendar year. Now let's start with the departures the team could not control. Josh Williams, Mendy, and McEwen were not afforded an extra year of eligibility, so right away the team lost 2 starters and an important piece off the bench as seniors. Luckily, a replacement for Mendy and Khalil Spear transferred in from Bucknell in May, a talented forward who could block with the best of them, but no one was sure if he would get his transfer waiver approved. The announcement that the team was moving to the Horizon League came out of the blue early in June and officially set in motion a chain reaction of events to follow. It would be a tough task, but the Colonials were geared up for it. Then, as has so often happened to Andy Toole, the transfer bug hit. Jalen Hawkins entered the portal in late July, and in August transferred to Norfolk State, where he would go off in the first 4 of the 2021 tournament. A big loss, but there were still high hopes heading into the season. The freshman class was led by Ferris, another 3-star recruit Tyson Brown, but also featured other freshmen who could evolve into pieces of the team going forward. Robert Morris was picked to place 4th in the preseason poll. Respect from the new conference's coaches was great for this team, and they were trying to not let them down. And then, the season started.
Entering a new conference, there is a lot of unknown, but for Robert Morris coming off a Northeast Conference Championship, there was a lot of promise in the Moon Township area as a team returned 4 out of their 5 starters from that championship team. But there were a lot of uncontrollable factors when it came to the 2020-2021 season. One of those major factors was the COVID-19 pandemic, which ravaged the entire country. And trying to put on a college basketball season amidst that pandemic, there were going to be a lot of obstacles that teams would have to hurdle over. And Robert Morris were one of those teams that had to hurdle and overcome a lot of those obstacles. Early on in the season, on November 19th, Robert Morris Athletics announced that the team's opening game against Point Park on November 25th, Central Michigan on November 28th, and the Florida Gulf Coast game on December 2nd would all be canceled due to coronavirus concerns in the RMU basketball program. After the first pause of the season, they put Point Park back on their schedule, but with just a few days of practice when they returned, they played the Pioneers on December 5th. The Colonials were able to win that game easily, as they should have, against an NAIA opponent. But the play was somewhat sloppy for the Colonials, but they were able to win 75-57. As a team was looking for some consistency in their schedule, by playing back-to-back games, they had a date with the West Virginia Mountaineers. But 24 hours before the game was supposed to be played, it was canceled once again due to COVID-19 concerns in the program. But shortly thereafter, as they were in their second pause, it was announced that all NCAA players would be immediately eligible for the 2020-2021 season. That meant Khalil Spear, the transfer from Bucknell, would be allowed to play in this COVID-19 season. That was a huge boost for the Colonials as they went into play their next two non-conference games against Bowling Green and Marshall. The team looked sluggish coming out of the gates. It seemed like they were still trying to find their footing. They lost both of those games. But after those two non-conference games, RMU had their first Horizon League series against the Purdue Fort Wayne Mastodons on the road. They were able to split the series against the Mastodons, but the defense looked sloppy as they gave up 80-plus points in both of those games. And as Andy Toole always likes to preach defense, the defense was not there. So they went home to take on Milwaukee and try to hopefully work on the defensive struggles as they took on the Panthers on New Year's Day. They played game one against in the Milwaukee series without Dante Tracy and John Williams, who were out for an undisclosed reason. They defeated the Panthers 67-64 without arguably the top two players on the team. Then another pause ensued the next day on January 2nd as Robert Morris Athletics announced that the game against Milwaukee was canceled. A few days later, they announced their road series against IUPUI was canceled due to COVID-19 concerns. After that third pause, Robert Morris struggled down the stretch, losing games, but for the most part, those games were close, including a series of overtime losses and 1 to 2 possession games. Then, on January 29th, AJ Brahma did not travel with the team to the team's 2-game series against Wright State, which started some unrest with the team. And just a few weeks later, AJ Brahma entered his name into the transfer portal on February 12, 2021. The day Brahma entered his name into the transfer portal, Robert Morris players played with fire, winning the game against Oakland in double overtime and winning their first game in over a month. But after that win for the Colonials, they dropped their last 3 games of the season, which included a first-round exit in the Horizon League tournament at the hands of Detroit Mercy. After a rough season, Andy Toole and company looked at the offseason to see how they could combat the different play style of the Horizon League and tried to bolster their roster to compete in the 2021-2022 season. Now, one question loomed was whether or not John Williams and Charles Baine would make a return in the 2021-22 season after the NCAA allowed an extra year of eligibility for all winter sport student athletes after the COVID-19 global pandemic. Now, it was later announced that John Williams and Charles Baine signed with agents so they would not be returning further extra year. John Williams was a mainstay in the Colonials rotation over his 4-year career at Robert Morris, starting in 118 out of 120 games as a Colonial. Williams averaged 7.1 points per game and 4.1 assists. He also shot at a 38% clip from the field and 41% clip from downtown. Charles Baine was also another mainstay in the Colonials starting lineup throughout his years as a Colonial in Moon Township. Baine appeared in 118 games, averaged 7.3 points per game, and shot the ball at a 38% clip from the field, as well as a 30% clip from downtown. These two will be sorely missed.
The Colonials' second offseason of change started with a bang as the team lost Cameron Wilbon to the transfer portal exactly 1 calendar year after their championship victory. Terrell Brown followed on the next day, understandably after a season where he had around 10 minutes of playing time all year. Dante Tracy was the next player to leave, transferring to Radford after a season where he took a dive in production but had his best playmaking season yet. Unfortunately, he had to leave in search of greener pastures. In between Tracy and their next transfer, RMU landed the commitment of Mattia Acunzo, the former highest recruit in Toledo history, an Italian forward who averaged nearly 6 points as a freshman with the Rockets. However, with every transfer in, there are transfers out. Pat Subnik jumped the ship after one season in Moon, and Traden Williams surprisingly followed suit a week later. Despite netting the commitment of St. John's grad transfer Rasheem Dunn, the team had an entirely different outlook after Subnik and Williams left. Coach Toole recruited Oklahoma State grad transfer Ferron Flavors Jr., who was coming off of his worst collegiate season with the Cowboys. He dominated in the past, and he was looking to right the wrongs in Moon. However, 1 week later, the final domino from the 2019-20 team fell. Forward Elisa Gennady announced that he was entering the transfer portal after playing sparingly in his first 2 seasons and transfers coming in. Out with Gennady went with an entire amazing season of Colonials basketball, and even with the commitment of Bryant transfer Michael Green III, the team had completely changed from just 1 year ago. 410 days after they sat atop the Northeast Conference, not one player who played a game that season remained on the roster. The transfer portal has been wild for every college this offseason, but has affected Robert Morrison in more ways than most schools. It's crazy how the team went from the top of the world to the bottom and back to the hopeful top in a record amount of time. With the roster remodeling and recruitment Andy Toole has put in, there is reason for optimism in Moon Township after a rough season. However, it's hard to look at the roster now and not remember their scintillating championship win in 2020 and notice that Colonials basketball will never be the same.